Hi, everyone. Welcome to this bi-weekly mastermind calls with SaaS experts and mentors. And some of you are part of our ongoing peer-to-peer group of mastermind calls. Those are we doing once a week. These are bi-weekly calls where I interview SaaS experts and mentors. And today we talk about the go-to-market strategy. I'd like to welcome my guest, Ryan Cahill. He is passionate about helping SaaS companies design, execute, and optimize sales and marketing strategies. He spent the last decade in the SaaS world for working with different industry leaders. He has also consulted hundreds of subscription startups, executives, and entrepreneurs. And Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience and expertise with the SaaS Boss community.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Can you give us a high-level overview of what we are going to be talking about today, what it is that you're going to be sharing with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to talk today is a little bit about the science of growth, and exactly where that's going to fit is really post-product market fit. So product market fit is when you first take your product or service out to market, you're really trying to figure out who is really the right audience for this, who's the right person we sell to. And then those first couple of 5, 10, 15 customers, you start to really sharpen that and say, okay, we now have validated that our solution is going to fit for these type of people. What we're going to talk about today is what you do next. So after you've got your first couple of customers, you've figured out who you're going to sell to and how, this is now how to figure out how do I scale that. And so in many cases, what we're going to be talking about is how do you replicate that success? And then how do you measure that and optimize that over time? And then I think the idea was that we were going to tee up the conversation with a little bit of that as context and then translate into some practical applications for what some of your audience specifically is dealing with right this moment, and use that measurement and that framework to talk through that, and then really just open it up for question and answer at that point.
Ryan, the floor is yours. We are eager to get you going.
Awesome. So the first thing I want to talk about is go-to-market broadly defined actually has quite a few different flavors. And so generally speaking, it's really the strategy that you have to go acquire net new customers or expand with the ones you have. But there's a lot of different ways you can do that. And so what I want to start with is just thinking about broadly defined, what are the different go-to-market types and strategies that you may take advantage of? And based upon the price point of your product, likely the right type of motion to think about. So what I'm going to diagram for you really quickly is on the left-hand side, these are going to be number of customers, or we'll say users in this example. And across the bottom is going to be value of your product or service. And so this can be in annual recurring dollars, could be monthly. It doesn't really matter, but I'm going to use annual just for simplicity's sake. And so if you think about most organizations, as the price point goes up, the number of people that can afford it goes down, right? If you sell $1 million product, there's only so many companies in the world that are willing to pay for that. If you sell a $1 product, obviously your audience is much larger. So as users at this end, the very high end user count, and generally speaking, let's say that first tier is $5,000 a year. The go-to-market strategy that's most commonly applied to this is what's generally deferred to as product-led growth. And product-led growth, you can think of platforms like Zoom. You can think of platforms like Slack, things that you can just kind of sign up for, start using, and then over time, you might end up buying more licenses, you might end up using them more. But generally speaking, you're not talking to a salesperson, you're not talking to someone in business development. It's generally a technical interaction from a sales motion. Once you break this $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 mark, generally you're usually engaging with somebody. You might have a couple of questions, you might need to see a demo. So in this stage, what we call this is traditionally is known as inside sales. So inside sales is often you're looking at a product, maybe you're doing some research on a website, you pick up the phone, you call someone, they maybe answer a few questions for you, send you a contract, but you're engaging with some human being at that point. And that goes generally to about the $15,000 mark before you necessarily want to or need to engage any additional resources. Once you get to this motion, what we're going to move into is what we call a 2 or more step process, meaning that you're going to engage with typically 2 or more individuals through your sales evaluation as the customer. And so this can be generally someone maybe in business development and sales, maybe it's sales and a technical resource, something like that. But this is generally when you move into like a two-stage process in your model. Now, what we're talking about here is this, the assumption here is that there's marketing across all of this. This is more just on the sales approach. Once you get to somewhere in that $30,000 to $50,000 mark, this process often involves at least two people and sometimes three. Sometimes you have a business development sales and maybe a sales engineer. Sometimes you might have some industry strategist. You might have multiple people over here. And so this can be a three-stage process. And then what you get at, let's say, $150,000, $200,000 and above for enterprise type solutions is often what we call one-to-one sales. And one-to-one sales is where you typically have, let's say, 5 accounts you're working on, and they're all whales. And so it's a very intimate relationship. It's a very long sales process. So it's a little bit different. So the reason I wanted to start with this is as you think about your product or service, depending on where you are in this spectrum of cost of your product, should be dictating the type of strategy that you're applying and will actually change the way and the different mechanisms that you use to grow and sell your solution. So then the next step is, okay, so I understand, generally speaking, for my type of product or service, what strategy I'm going to go after. And then what you need to figure out at that point is, okay, how do I, in many cases, replicate success? I've been successful closing 10, 15, 20 customers. How do I do that on a much more predictable basis? And what is the journey that customer is going to go through to come from an anonymous person that doesn't know you exist to a very happy customer? So if you think about the SaaS model, it's actually not a funnel. It actually creates a different diagram. And so if you think about SaaS in this way, this being the close where you contract with your customer, mature SaaS companies make most of their money after a sale. So when you think about SaaS and you think about SaaS measurement, we actually have to think of the whole customer life cycle, because unlike one-time products, I now have to service a customer back here, but I also have the opportunity to sell them more. So we want to think about measuring the SaaS model really across the entire customer life cycle. So we're going to give you a framework that you can use to think about your business, your product or service, and what journey that customer goes through. The one thing that I would encourage everyone to start thinking about right now is who is the person that you're generally going to be selling to, and focus your strategy on what is going to empower them the most. I think what's happened over the last handful of years is we don't convince people to buy anymore. Sometimes we think we do, but the reality is if they're talking to you, they already considered to do something different. So it's really a buyer-centric market. And so the way you want to think about your go-to-market is how do I help someone buy versus convince them to buy? And if you do that, generally speaking, those customers or companies rather are very successful. If you think of the Amazons of the world, the reason they succeed is they make the customer experience so powerful and so easy. And we want to do that with our go-to-market approach as well. So if you think about SaaS, and this is going to be a pretty oversimplification, there's really only 7 key metrics that you want to pay attention to diagnose, is what I'm doing working in an efficient way, and how do I make it even more efficient over time? So if today it takes you $1,000 to acquire a customer, it's obviously better if I can acquire a customer for $750 or $500, et cetera. So what you want to think about is kind of the key transition points in the customer's journey. So if way on the left-hand side of this diagram, you have effectively prospects. These are people that may or may not even know you exist that you'd like to do business with. We've got to figure out from a marketing standpoint, how do I go attract these people and get them to engage in my brand in some way? Visit my website, attend a webinar, respond to an email, et cetera, right? And this first conversion point, we're going to call, well, generally speaking, let's just call it an MQL, which is a marketing qualified lead, right? So you might have leads that come in and it's a fictitious name just because they wanted to read, a piece of your content or something like that. But we'll call it a marketing qualified lead. And generally speaking, this is not just a human being. This is a human being that has in some way expressed interest in engaging with you. Doesn't mean they're ready to buy, but it does mean they're willing to engage. It could be a contact us form. It could be a demo request. It could be, I'd like to just learn more. Those are all I would consider marketing qualified leads, assuming that the person doing so also fits the criteria of who you want to do business with. So we are going to call an MQL conversion rate 1. So this is the first time we get to measure who's visiting my website, who's engaging with me, and how many of those people are now converting here. The MQL effectively is a qualification metric for the performance of marketing. If this rate grows over time, it means you are doing a better job at targeting your customer base and a better job of converting them to be interested to engage. So if you have 1,000 people on your email list and every month 10, 20, 30 of them become leads, you now can measure how active you are at engaging with them via email. So in this, you should also be measuring, different channels. So whether it's email, whether it's social, whatever the different mechanisms you're using, you want to start to segment those out to see which of those is working best for your specific audience. I would really highly encourage you to also, as you engage with these folks, ask them how they find out about you. And even more importantly, what was it about what you're doing that prompted their interest? Because again, the main question as we think about optimizing a go-to-market is you have to understand why. Why did this person engage with my brand? Why did this person become a customer? And how do I find more of those people? Where do they search for that type of stuff so you can be effective? I think one of the key things you want to do, especially in the early stages, is do as much interviews and interaction you can with who you think your customers are going to be. If you have to pay for it, it's worth it. Buy them lunch, buy them a cup of coffee, whatever you can do, and really dig into their mindset. And so what we generally call persona work is a very valuable exercise. And so the idea is, depending on who your buyer is, let's just say you're selling a product that heads of sales might use. You've got to get into the mind of someone who's in sales. What are their concerns? What are their pains? What are the things they're trying to accomplish? How do they think? Where do they get their information? The deeper you understand that, the more effective you are going to be at communicating to them. Now, the head of sales doesn't think anything similar to maybe the head of marketing or the head of human resources or a CFO or a developer. We all think differently, and so therefore we got to talk differently to those audiences. A technical audience does not want flowery language. They want specifics. They want details. They want examples. But a marketer, they think about emotional things. They want to talk emotional language. So you're going to have to interact differently. And so what I would encourage you to do is really do some deep analysis to define who it is you're talking to and how they want to be interacted with, and then marry that into your product, service, and all your communications. One of the biggest things that we see with our clients is that the websites that people build are really self-serving. They don't talk to the customer. They don't talk about the customer. They don't talk about the customer's problems. They brag about the product. People don't want to hear that, because what they don't understand, and what your job is to do, is to connect the dots between my pain and your solution. You should make it very clear on, if you have these type of problems, that's what we solve. If the customer has to somehow figure that out on their own, likely they're not going to. They're not going to give you the time, and they're going to move it to someone who will. So I would take a lot of time to really thoughtfully think through the messaging that you put out there. If you're the person you're trying to sell to, is it very clear to them how it will help them, what problems it solves for them, and what the impact or benefit of that solution will be? Any other questions? Okay. So let's assume we've been successful at this. We've done some great marketing. We've got awareness to the audience. They've now engaged, saying, hey, this is interesting. Let's move forward. We then get to, and depending on the type of model, this can be called two different things, a sales qualified lead or a sales accepted lead. And the difference between C and C is now I'm willing to engage in a sales process. So I've reached out, I've raised my hand in some capacity. You've probably followed up with that individual. And now they say, based on what you've said and shared and what I've learned so far, I'm willing to evaluate this possible solution for my company. So that's a key transitionary point that we want to see. Now, there's something else that this tells us. If this rate is doing well, what that means is the people that we are attracting are also happen to be in the market. That's the ideal state. That's obviously not always going to be the case, and we want to try to grow that over time. If the people we're attracting are not translating to engaged, we need to go back and look at the messaging that we're doing and figure out a way to try to identify when someone has a need. Now, that's easier said than done, because it's very difficult to know what's going on in someone's head or in someone's business. But the more you can understand not only engaging the right people, but engaging people at the right time, the efficiency of your marketing and business development efforts will increase substantially. So pay careful, close attention to that. And I would, again, use every engagement as an opportunity to learn, even if they don't buy from you. what was it that got you willing to engage in the sales process right now? Do you have a contract expiration coming up with your existing provider? Did you just have enough pain where you just couldn't take it anymore? What was the certain scenario that came into being that caused you willing to engage now? Because now is a key part in any business. Every solution that all of you are making likely adds value. But the question is it critical to my business now? Because if it isn't, I can push it off to next month, next quarter, next year, and those are just leads. They're not customers. So we've got to figure that out. In some cases, the willingness to buy now, you can negotiate in if the value proposition is compelling enough. But more often than not, people make decisions on immediate pains. If it's just a complete distraction to your business, you just want to go solve that problem so you can get back to doing other things. And so you want to figure out who those people are. In many cases, what we would recommend is adding an additional stage, which you could call sales qualified pipeline. You could call a sales accepted lead. You can call it whatever you want. But basically what this means is I'm willing to engage with sales, but I'm also making a decision now. A lot of companies are willing to engage with sales, but they don't actually have a project right now. And so you want to be very careful. Your salespeople, as you continue to grow your company, and your time, if you're doing the sales now, is very valuable. So if you spend a lot of time trying to sell someone and they want to buy, next summer, you've wasted your time. So we want to be very sensitive to say, okay, what is the time period from here to here that you've learned from your existing customers? This would basically be the sales cycle. And let's just say in some cases, maybe that's 90 days. You need to clarify at this point that this person is willing to make a decision within 90 days. If the answer is no, then you need to bring them back and nurture them until that time arrives. What I see a lot of people get distracted on is someone's like, oh, I'm interested. Interested and ready to buy are not the same thing. So we need to make sure they're ready to buy in the time frame that you think is reasonable for your business so that we don't spend a lot of cycles and energy on people that aren't willing to sign right now, because you need that revenue. The next conversion point, and then I'll pause for questions, is conversion rate 4. This is basically your close rate. So how many people got to this point and then bought your product or service? And this is a key measurement of sales effectiveness. So if you have, let's say, a $30,000 product a year, a $30,000 product, you should be closing somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 of these deals. If you sell a $5,000 to $10,000 product, 1 out of 5 is pretty decent. If you sell a couple $1,000 product, maybe 1 out of 6. As you do more volume, the numbers go down a bit. If you sell a $100,000 product, you should be closing 1 out of 3. You got to be very, very disciplined here, because a lot of time, money, and energy is spent in the sales process. And if you don't actually close them, you don't get any return. I would think about nurturing differently for those type of things than general nurturing. Nurturing a trial should be different than nurturing someone who just, a contact us form or someone that downloaded a white paper. Those people should be engaged with in a unique way that represents really what they're doing, because the trial nurturing is often helping them see the value of the solution, whereas general nurturing is just helping them be aware of what you bring to the table. They're a little bit different.
Yep.
Any other questions? Okay. So the other thing I want to layer in here as well is we should be measuring between these things time. So how long does it take someone to raise their hand to engage with us in a sales motion? How long does it take me to confirm that they actually are ready to buy now? And how long does it take me to sell them? The reason is the sum of that now becomes your front to back sales time frame. So if I have to market and nurture them for a couple weeks, if I have to engage with them for a couple weeks and sell them for a couple weeks, you now know how long it takes for you to move someone through the process where you start to get money, and you can back your way out into that. So if you're starting today, you know that this amount of time is before you can get your first next sale. And so as you start modeling that out for your business, that'll start to give you an indication of kind of the lead time that you need to get that revenue engine going. Okay, so as we move forward, there's 3 more gates that we want to pay attention to on the back of the business. So the first one we call C. I know it's very clever, but that conversion is really the onboarding time frame and conversion rate. Do you churn people out before they ever go live? Because that gives you an indication of the experience of that process is probably not ideal. It also gives you a really key indicator for the customer. So what happens up until that point is the customer's not received any value yet. I know when we're running our business, when we're operating internally, we sometimes lose focus of the person we're interacting with. As you go through a sales process as a buyer, you don't get anything out of that. You don't actually get value even at the sale. You get value once the product is live and working and doing something for you and your company. So really, the time to value for the customer, the whole sales and marketing evaluation cycle and implementation, now I've got a product that I'm using and I'm getting value from in some way. So be very thoughtful as you think about this, because you need to make sure that after the sale that you are helping someone see how close they are to experiencing value. Because if people start to lose their endurance to engage with you, you potentially churn out customers before they ever saw whether the thing would work or not. And that's a really dangerous thing for SaaS, because obviously we need to keep as many of those customers in as possible. So this is basically the implementation process, onboarding, whatever you want to call it, the go live process until the customer gets up to speed using the tool. The next stage we'll call CR6, and this is basically renewal. So if you sell a month-to-month product, it would be every month. If this is annual contracts or multi-year contracts, it's contract 1 to contract 2. So this is the number of people that have signed up and used the product and now decide to continue their relationship for a longer period of time. And then the last piece is CR7, and this is lifetime value. So this is how many of the people that bought something bought more of it. So if churn, this would be churn rate, right? At this point, this is now expansion or upsell rate. So if I got a subscription for $1,000 a month, but in that next year I got them up to $1,500 a month, then you're doing a really good job of increasing the spend of that customer and expanding the revenue through your client base. And again, we want to be very close attention to the time frames of these as well. If implementation time starts to drift out, that potentially increases your churn risk, and so we want to pay attention to that. If you're churning out customers, that's a problem, because what it may mean is I'm targeting the wrong people. So if I get people to buy, but then they don't experience the value, I may be offering it to the wrong audience, the wrong vertical, the wrong person. And then the expansion rate for a SaaS company to be really successful, you have to have more things to sell. So if you think of a Salesforce or any of these large SaaS organizations, they have this huge portfolio of things that they can sell their client base, and that's where the majority of their revenue comes from. So if you look at Salesforce's earnings, which come out in a couple of weeks, you'll likely see north of 80 or 90 cents of every dollar comes from selling their customers just more things. So as you start to mature as a business, you want to start thinking about how can I get more licenses, maybe a usage fee, maybe new modules to increase revenue. Let me pause there. Questions on the backside of this?
Greg commented, very enterprise focused. Ryan, how can smaller level companies can utilize this method as well?
Yeah, so I think the formality of this, I think in many cases does feel like enterprise. Regardless of the size of your organization, you need to know these answers. And you need to be measuring this type of transitions, whether you have 20 customers or 2,000. Because if you don't know why someone does something, then you can't replicate success and you can't make it any better. If I don't know why the customer took an extra month to implement, then how do I make implementation better? How do I make the product better to make it easier to adopt? We really need to pay attention to these things regardless of size of company. Now, I would agree the level of formality here for a smaller organization definitely doesn't need to be as thorough, but you need to be paying close attention to why someone does something. The biggest mistake that I see SaaS companies make, regardless of size, is they can't answer a simple question. Why did the last customer that you sold buy you? In their words, not what you think, why did they actually transact? Because if you don't know the answer to that, it's very hard to go find more of them or to speak to the things that they're trying to solve.
This has been very helpful, Ryan. Is there anything else that we didn't ask you but should have? Any last parting words?
I would say just the key focus and the advice that I would give you is constantly ask the question, why? We got a new lead today. Why? What ad did they see? What email did they respond to? Why did they respond? What do they want to know about? What type of company are they? Keep asking the question, why? Because what you're trying to figure out is the thought process of a successful customer, right? What was it that we said to them that got them interested? What was it that, we did in the demo that convinced them that we were the right solution? What was it that, we did an implementation to make them happy? Keep asking yourself why, because what it will do is just refine your approach. I would encourage you to be as focused as you possibly can be. If your product or service can meet the needs of 10 different companies, just pick one of them to get really good at. If you can service 3 different verticals, pick one to get good at. One of the biggest dangers in an early stage company is you go too broad, too fast, and it makes lessons learned here much more difficult. If I'm only targeting, let's say, small businesses in this type of vertical, I can learn these lessons quick, and then I can go learn lessons in a new area. If you're going after everyone under the sun, it's very difficult for you to get better because you don't have a sample size large enough and you don't have enough consistency in what you're doing to know actually what's working or what's not.
And that's going to help you with your language that you use on the website, on all of those landing pages, on all of your outreach and, follow-up email sequences, because I see so many times that the website speaks to everyone and basically speaks to no one, right? So if you have this particular industry, either have a separate landing page or have the whole website talk about that specific industry using that specific language. And I think this is definitely something that's going to help you with all of those conversions and increase your conversion rates.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.